What if the most expensive shield in human history was never meant to actually stop anything? What if its real job was to make an enemy hesitate, and one small desert country just proved that job is already failing? Before we go further, if you want more videos like this, breaking down the real strategy behind the headlines, tap that subscribe button now, hit like so this reaches more people who need to see it, and send this to one friend who still thinks missile defense is just about missiles. Because it isn't. Stay with me, because this one gets uncomfortable fast. In the summer of 2026, the United States signed off on another round of contracts for a giant satellite network. Its job was to spot enemy missiles the moment they launched and destroy them before they ever crossed an ocean. The man who ordered this system built had promised, in public, that it would be fully working before he left office. That promise is still hanging in the air, unproven, expensive, and now, strangely, already tested. Because months before those contracts were signed in the open desert north of Doha, something happened that nobody in Washington wanted to talk about. A single Iranian missile, not a swarm, not a saturation attack, just one missile, slipped past an American-made Patriot air defense battery and slammed into a massive gas facility. Billions of dollars of damage. One missile. One battery. One quiet Tuesday that most people never even heard about. Here is why that moment matters so much. The system that failed that day as the grandfather of the system America is now spending trillions to build. If the older, simpler shield could not stop one missile in an empty desert against a country that isn't even formally at war with the United States, what does that tell us about the giant, unfinished, futuristic version still years away from completion? That is the real question hiding underneath all the noise. Not whether the new shield is too expensive, not whether it will be ready on time, not whether putting weapons in space is a good idea. Those are real questions. But they are the small questions. The big question, the one almost nobody's asking out loud, is this. What happens to a country's entire defense strategy the moment its rivals stop believing the shield actually works? Whether or not it does? Because here is something most people never think about. A missile shield was never only a wall of steel and computer code. It was always partly a story told to friends to reassure them, and a story told to enemies to make them think twice. And for the first time in years, that story cracked wide open. On camera, in front of the whole world. Let me say the most important idea in this entire video, because everything else builds on it. A shield can fail on the battlefield and still win in the mind of the enemy. And a shield can succeed on the battlefield and still lose in the mind of the enemy, the moment the wrong people stop trusting it. Belief and performance are two completely different battles, and right now, one of them just took a direct hit. Think of it like this. Imagine someone tries to sell you an old, cracked umbrella and calls it waterproof. As long as it never actually rains hard, nobody questions it. The label holds, the confidence holds. People walk around under it feeling safe. But the moment a real storm hits and water pours straight through, the illusion is gone forever, and you cannot sell that same umbrella the same way again. Missile shields have worked like this for 70 years, not as perfect defenses, but as convincing bluffs that nobody dared to test. Go back to the 1980s. An American president announced a bold plan to build a space-based system that could destroy Soviet nuclear missiles before they ever reached the ground. Scientists at the time said the technology was decades away, maybe impossible. They were mostly right. The lasers never flew. The space platforms never launched. But it did not matter. The Soviet leadership could not afford to call the bluff and be wrong, so they poured huge amounts of money into counters for a weapon that barely existed on paper, straining an economy that was already cracking. Historians still argue that this imaginary shield helped speed up the collapse of an empire. A system that never fired a single shot may have helped decide the outcome of a decades-long standoff. That is the power of belief over steel. There's a simple piece of logic behind all of this, and it explains almost everything that follows. In any contest between an attacker and a defender, the attacker only needs to succeed once, anywhere, at any time. The defender has to succeed everywhere, every single time, forever. That imbalance is baked into the math. It means the side building the shield is always fighting a more expensive, more fragile battle than the side building the weapon, no matter how much money gets poured into it. Keep that idea in your head, because you are about to see it show up in real numbers, not theory. The newest version of this old bet is a massive satellite shield designed to catch ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons, and cruise missiles before they reach American soil using space-based sensors and a hidden web of tracking satellites that the military will not even fully explain to its own lawmakers. Same wager as before, same question hanging over it. Does it actually have to work, or does it only have to look from far away like it might? Hold that question, because in the first half of 2026, for the first time, someone actually tried to test it in full view of the entire planet, and cameras were rolling the whole time. There are several pieces of evidence here, and each one adds weight to the last, so stick with me through all of them, because together they tell a very different story than any single headline could. The first piece is timing. On the very same day that the United States and Israel launched joint strikes against Iran, starting what is now called the 2026 Iran War, a group of Chinese military researchers published a technical paper. Their conclusion was blunt. Existing American missile defenses might catch some hypersonic weapons in their final seconds of flight, but speed, sharp maneuvering, and stealth made reliable interception extremely difficult. Picture a weather agency publishing the exact landing spot of a hurricane before the storm has even fully formed out at sea. Sometimes that is luck. Sometimes it means somebody has been quietly studying this exact storm for years. A group of scientists described the failure point of American missile defense on the very day the fighting began. That is not hindsight. That is a forecast. Hold on to it. The second piece is that the forecast was tested within days. Iran's military claimed that during one of its strikes, hypersonic missiles and drones slipped past American-made air defenses protecting Tel Aviv, hitting targets near sensitive military and government sites. Now, this claim came from a side fighting the war, not a neutral observer. What is documented is that footage did surface showing Iranian weapons reaching deep into defended, populated areas at high speed. What is still debated is exactly how many missiles got through and exactly why. But footage does not care about press releases. And the pattern that Chinese researchers described on day one showed up on video within the week. The third piece is the one that should worry you the most because it happened far from the main battlefield against an American partner using American equipment. In the Gulf state of Qatar, a single Iranian missile with the ability to maneuver in flight evaded a Patriot battery, one of the very systems the new satellite shield is supposed to eventually replace, and struck a major gas complex, causing enormous damage. This did not happen in Tel Aviv, a city with a decade of layered, hardened defenses behind it. It happened in a quiet Gulf monarchy hosting American power on an ordinary day, with almost no warning. Picture a smoke detector built to sense nearly every kind of fire in a building, except the one that starts in the single room nobody thought to wire properly. That is what happened in the desert. And it matters even more when you remember that a huge share of the world's oil moves through the waters nearby. A region's entire defensive setup showed a hole, on video, in broad daylight, on a day nobody expected one. The fourth piece is money, and this is where the story gets almost impossible to ignore. When the satellite shield was first announced to the public, the price tag was under $200 billion. That number is already dead. Within months, an official congressional estimate put the real cost well over $1 trillion. And an outside analysis, looking at the full 20-year plan, sensors, interceptors, satellites, everything, put the ceiling as high as $3.5 trillion. For a system whose own designers admit, in writing, that a fully space-based version runs straight into the basic laws of physics. Sit with that contrast for a second. A missile that cost almost nothing compared to a single interceptor just beat an older system in an open desert, while the system meant to replace that older one is quietly becoming one of the most expensive military programs ever built by any country. This may be the single most consequential number in the entire American defense budget, and most people have never even heard of it. The fifth piece is that America does not even have its own offensive answer working yet. In the spring of 2026, American military commanders asked to deploy the Army's own hypersonic missile to the Middle East, which would have marked the very first time the United States ever used one of these weapons in real combat. The request came with an awkward footnote. The Pentagon's own testing office admitted it would not have enough data to fully judge that weapon's real performance until the following year. Meanwhile, other major powers have already been using their own hypersonic weapons for years. It is a little like showing up to a fight and still waiting on paperwork to clear your own knife. So picture the real gap here. Years, not months, between one country routinely firing advanced maneuvering weapons in live combat and the world's wealthiest military still asking permission to try its very first one. The sixth piece is about command structure. Iran's missile and drone forces are not sitting in one single bunker waiting to be knocked out with a single strike. They are spread out across many regions, hard to switch off all at once, closer to a swarm than a single snake, because a snake has one head and a swarm does not. And Iran's own defense leadership said, publicly within weeks of the Qatar strike, that expanding these weapons is a matter of national security, not something open for negotiation. That is not a country backing away from the approach that just embarrassed an American-made system. That is a country doubling down on it in public, on the record. The seventh piece ties everything together because it is not just about Iran. It is about who was watching from the sidelines. There is a long-standing economic and defense relationship between Beijing and Tehran. And through this war, there are credible reports that companies connected to China supplied dual-use technology, some of it related to missile components, along with satellite intelligence support, even while diplomats from that same government publicly presented themselves as neutral peacemakers. Picture a neighbor quietly lending a ladder to both sides of a backyard argument, while telling each side, with a straight face, that he has no opinion about the fence at all. This was not a country just narrating a war from a distance. It was, according to credible reporting, a country quietly supplying pieces of it, while its own research institutes studied every single intercept, successful or failed, like a term paper due at the end of the semester. 7 pieces. A forecast. A claim that got confirmed. A real filmed failure against an older system. A budget that has already grown far past what the public was first told. A weapons gap. America is not closed yet. A command structure that cannot simply be cut off at the head. And a patient partner quietly collecting the data from the sidelines. On its own, each one of these is a story that disappears from the news in a couple of days. Together, they form a pattern. And a pattern is the only thing that should actually change how seriously you take a multi-trillion-dollar bet, not any single headline pulling you in either direction. If you have made it this far, you already care more about this topic than most people ever will. So do one small thing for me right now. Drop a comment with just one word, shield or bucket, telling me which one you think this program really is. It takes 5 seconds, and it helps this video reach more people who are asking the same questions you are. Now, let's be fair, because the strongest version of the opposing argument deserves real attention, not a quick dismissal. Supporters of the new shield have a genuine point, and it is not a small one. Earlier in this same war, in one massive wave of attacks, American and Israeli forces reportedly intercepted the majority of hundreds of ballistic missiles, and roughly 1,000 drones launched by Iran in a single barrage. One respected research group put that success rate at around 85%. 85% in real combat against one of the largest missile arsenals in the region is genuinely impressive. It may be one of the most effective integrated defense performances in modern military history, though it is worth being honest that other independent reviews of the same footage, examined frame by frame, put the real number closer to 60 or 70%. Even the win is debated before you get anywhere near the loss. And remember, the old Soviet-era bluff never actually had to work either. It only had to make the other side blink first. Maybe the designers of this new shield know exactly what they are building. Not a perfect wall, but something expensive enough, secretive enough, unpredictable enough, that no rival ever wants to run the real experiment against it. The military has gone as far as restricting its own officials from discussing technical details in public, even with lawmakers who are supposed to be overseeing the spending. That secrecy might just be sound protection of sensitive information, not proof that the program is hiding its own weaknesses. Serious, experienced people inside the defense establishment genuinely believe that. There is another fair point worth taking seriously, too. No defense system in history has ever been asked to protect an entire continent-sized country against 4 different kinds of threats at once: ballistic, hypersonic, cruise, and space-launched, rather than a single small nation. Judging a system that is still being built against a war it was not even fully deployed to fight feels unfair in a sense. An unfinished bridge does not get credit for the cars it has not carried yet. But it also should not take the blame for collapsing under weight it was never asked to bear. That is a genuinely serious argument, and I want you to hold on to it. But here is what that argument cannot explain. It cannot explain why a group of military researchers on the other side of the world predicted the exact failure pattern, fast maneuvering weapons slipping past ground-based defenses, on the very same day the fighting started, before any of it had actually happened, and then watched it play out almost exactly as described. A forecast is not the same thing as a lucky guess. And a coincidence this precise, published this quickly, by a country whose entire military industry is built around solving exactly this problem, should worry you more than any single interception statistic ever could. It also cannot explain what happened in the Qatar desert. 85% success in a massive, saturating wave of attacks against mature, layered Israeli defenses is one story. One single missile beating one single battery, a system that is supposed to be reliable precisely because it is not facing an overwhelming saturation attack, is an entirely different story. And it is the second story that actually maps onto what the new shield is promising to protect for decades to come. Not a capital city on its worst possible night, but ordinary places, ordinary targets, on ordinary days, all the time, for years into the future. The strongest defense of the program explains one spectacular save. It does not explain a quiet failure weeks later, against a target almost nobody was watching closely at all. There is one more layer worth mentioning before we move on, because it changes how you should read every number in this story. Cost overruns are common in big defense programs. Everyone knows that. But this is not a normal overrun. Going from under 200 billion to well past $1 trillion and possibly past $3 trillion is not a program running slightly over budget. It is a program whose original price tag was never really a serious estimate at all. It was a number chosen to make the project sound achievable, so that the harder, more expensive truth could be revealed slowly, piece by piece, once the public had already committed to the idea. So put it all together. The shield was never really sold to the public as something imperfect. It was sold as something close to total, a genuine, near-complete wall protecting the homeland from nearly everything, up to and including weapons launched from space itself. But the actual evidence from the one live combat laboratory available to test these ideas shows a mixed picture wearing a very confident face. Real intercepts did happen against the massive saturation attack the system was, at least in part, actually designed for. And real, repeated, camera-documented failures also happened against exactly the newer, cheaper, more maneuverable threats that this new space-based architecture is specifically supposed to solve. The very same threats a group of researchers predicted it would struggle against. The public price has already climbed far past its original number, with credible outside estimates running past $3 trillion for a system whose full design remains hidden even from much of the government meant to be overseeing it. None of this proves the shield is worthless. What it proves is that the shield's real value was never purely technical. Its real value was the uncertainty surrounding it. And uncertainty, once it has been tested on live video in a friendly country's backyard, is very hard to rebuild once it is gone. That is the whole trap. It was never really about the missiles. It was always about the doubt. And yes, the unfinished bridge argument is fair. This system genuinely is not complete, and it genuinely is unfair to judge an unfinished system on a war it was not built to fight yet. But strategy does not wait for construction schedules to finish. Rivals update what they believe based on the evidence available today, not the system promised for some future year. A bridge that is not finished, yet still tells drivers something every single day it remains half-built. It tells them not to trust their full weight to it yet. That gap between the promise and the delivery date may be the most expensive thing about this entire program right now. But here's the part almost nobody is talking about, and it is the part that turns this from a story about American spending into a much bigger story about global strategy. Every single lesson learned in that Iranian desert, every intercept that worked, every one that failed, every maneuver that slipped past a defense battery was collected, studied, and published by a country that never fired a single shot in that war. A rising military power did not need to test its own advanced missiles against American defenses to find out whether they would survive contact. Iran tested them for free. A patient government got a live-fire laboratory, real combat data on exactly how American and Allied interceptors perform against maneuverable, fast, saturation-style threats. The kind of data you normally cannot get outside of an actual war with the United States itself. And it got all of that data while publicly presenting itself as a neutral, hands-off outsider. That is a patient power reading the whole board, while two other players pay the price for the lesson, collecting the tuition without ever enrolling in the class. And the real audience for that lesson was never Tehran. Foreign policy analysts have already connected these dots in plain language. What worked and what failed against Iran directly shapes another government's confidence about a very different situation, thousands of kilometers away, involving a small, heavily defended island that has been a flashpoint for years. That same rising power is reportedly working to expand its own arsenal. One country supplied the live test, the patient observer took the notes, and if that exam is ever actually given, it will not be given in the Gulf. Think about what that actually means for the wider picture. For years, planners in Washington assumed that in a future conflict over that island, long-range strikes from a rising rival could badly damage American operations across the Pacific before Washington could respond in any meaningful way. The way this Middle Eastern war actually played out, with real intercepts landing in real time, cuts against that old assumption in one direction. But the failure in Qatar and the same-day research paper describing it in advance cuts back in the other direction, and cuts harder because it shows precisely which kinds of threats still slip through, even a mature, combat-tested system. A rising power now has a far clearer picture than it had 18 months ago of exactly where the American shield holds firm and exactly where it leaks. And that clarity, whichever way it points, changes the confidence with which any government approaches a decision it was previously too uncertain to make. If this kind of analysis is actually giving you something you can't find anywhere else, this is the moment to hit subscribe, because there's a lot more coming. So what should you actually be watching for in the days and weeks just ahead? 3 things. First, watch the lawmakers holding the purse strings. With cost estimates now measured in the trillions, and the full architecture still largely hidden, expect louder, sharper demands for an honest, unclassified accounting of what this shield can actually promise to intercept, and by when. Second, watch Iran continue to publicize, rather than hide, its missile and drone progress. A country that just called its arsenal a non-negotiable red line has every reason to keep demonstrating what it can do, rather than concealing it. Third, And this is the one almost nobody bothers to track. Watch the technical journals coming out of Chinese military research institutes. The real signal was never going to come from a foreign ministry press conference. It comes from what military researchers quietly publish next. None of these three predictions are guaranteed. That is the whole point of a prediction instead of a certainty. Write them down. Come back in a few months and hold this analysis just as accountable as I am asking you to hold this shield accountable. Here's your homework if you actually want to understand this instead of just watching one video about it and moving on. Find the official congressional cost estimate for this satellite shield and place it side by side with the original announcement. Then go read what independent analysts have said about whether space-based interceptors are even technically realistic at the scale being promised. Put those two things next to each other and draw your own conclusion about what is really being bought here and who it is really meant to convince. And if you think I have gotten this wrong, if you think the 85% number matters more than what happened in Qatar, say so in the comments. I actually want to be challenged on this one because that is how this channel gets sharper together with you. So I will leave you with this. A shield does not have to stop everything to change how the whole world behaves around it. It only has to keep an enemy unsure. But once an enemy stops being unsure, once the holes have been shown on video, does the shield still do its job? Or is a multi-trillion-dollar bet quietly turning into something everyone involved can now see? Has holes in it, no matter how confidently it was sold? I will see you in the next one.